Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity work, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're always about the positive vibes here on the show. And with me right now, I've got a very special guest. He has worked for numerous promotions across the world, across the country, including the WWE and the USWA. I'm pleased to welcome the Spellbinder. Welcome to Wrestling with Heart.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it.
All right. So are you from New York City originally?
Originally from, Brooklyn, New York. I was born and raised.
All right. Tell me about your childhood and upbringing.
Well, man, growing up in New York is totally different from, growing up really anywhere else. I grew up, both my parents, and grew up, I guess you would say in the projects. So, I was exposed to a lot of things early in my life.
Very hard, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it was, thank God my dad was a boxing promoter. So I was always in some type of athletic, event, whether it was boxing or some type of karate, that type of thing. So, I kept myself busy. He kept me pretty busy, instead of being out in the streets where, most of my friends were.
Do you feel that kind of helped prepare you for the world of professional wrestling, that kind of martial arts background?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely, because I was always an athlete. And the thing about it is, to this very day, I've never had a drink in my life. I don't know what a beer tastes like. I don't know what a cigarette is like. I have not ever touched any type of drug, alcohol, anything like that. And so I have to attribute it to getting started early, 5, 6 years old in some type of athletic, again, whether it was boxing, karate, or, basketball, I was always in some type of, athletic activity.
And I think it's important to have discipline instilled in such a young age because that's how you learn, that's how you grow, and you build confidence. You learn self-control, and it just teaches you a lot of values and being able to how to do things, learn right from wrong.
Well, yeah, that, and it always helps. My dad growing up was a bodybuilder as well. So he was, a bigger than normal person. And I'll never forget him telling me that if he ever found out that I was drinking or smoking, he'd kill me. So that was something I wasn't going to forget.
Now, was wrestling always something you enjoyed growing up?
No, not at all. Actually, wrestling was the furthest thing. Like I said, I was always into martial arts and boxing and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, I started competing as a martial artist in karate tournaments. And I was always tall, but very, very thin. And so one of my instructors, Shidoshi, Nathan Ingram, said, well, listen, you know what you should do? You need to put on some weight. You need to make, start eating more and go ahead and hit the weights. And I said, are you sure? And he said, yeah, they're going to help you. You're going to help you get rooted and stuff. And I said, okay. So I started training with weights, and I started, I put on a few pounds. The next thing you know, people were telling me how good I was looking, and oh my God, Dale, you're getting big and this and that. And I said, whoa, all right, I'm gonna roll with this. So I started enjoying, training with weights and feeling the pump, and of course getting, the attention. And I decided to start competing as a bodybuilder, and that's how everything took off. Now, as far as the wrestling was concerned, my younger brother, God rest his soul, my brother Jimmy, he was a big wrestling fan. And I remember him, I was a big guy. When I was competing, I was 6'3", and I was about 275 pounds. And he would always come to me and say, hey, hey Dell, you know what? You should wrestle. And I would look at him like he was crazy, because I wanted to be Mr. Olympia, Mr. America. I didn't want to, jump around in the ring and all that type of stuff. And he continued, and as a matter of fact, I had a couple of local wrestlers in New York, in Brooklyn, that were weight training as well, and they would say, "Man, you should wrestle, man. You look unbelievable," and blah blah. And I just, again, they, to me, that was just a joke. You know what I mean? I wanted to be just a famous bodybuilder. That was what my sights were. Um, it wasn't till my brother got sick. My brother was always sickly. He was born with damaged kidneys, and I'll never forget. Throughout his whole life, he was in and out of the hospital, in and out of doctor's appointments. And man, as I got older, and I just felt stronger and growing, and growing. And my heart grew with him, and I would almost feel guilty that I was, this big strong guy, and my brother was this weak guy. One of the things that I respected and loved about my brother was he never let that bother him. You know what I mean? He was living his life, and never said, why did this happen to me? That type of thing. And so one day, I remember, I'll never forget it. I was working out. At this time, I was a personal trainer as well in New York. And I was working out, and I heard on the radio in the gym that the WWF at the time was coming to Madison Square Garden, and it was going to be the Ultimate Warrior and Mr. Perfect and stuff like that. And I just felt like, you know what? I says, I'm going to take my brother. So I went and bought, at the time, I had a girlfriend. So it was me, my girlfriend. I bought my brother a ticket. And I might have went with one of the other guys from the gym that was a local wrestler. And I remember buying the 4 tickets, and my brother came into the gym, and I said, hey, Friday night, I'm going to take you to the Madison Square Garden, okay? And he was like, what? And I said, yeah, we're going to go watch wrestling. Well, anyway, I bought really good tickets because I think we were about 6th, 7th row back from the ring. And we were in Madison Square Garden, and, we were watching the show. And one of the security guys / usher walked by me and stopped and looked down and bent over it. And so my brother was to my right, I was to his left, and my girlfriend. Anyway, he reached over and he says, hey, what are you doing down here? You should be in there. And he pointed to the ring. And my brother had a field day with that. See, I told you this. And, I just took it, I chuckled and just said, just as a thing, I had a character in mind already. I had, when I was growing up as well, and I bypassed all of this, but when I was growing up, I was also a magician. I loved doing magic. I was doing, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, up to 15, I was doing magic shows for birthday parties and stuff like that. So, I loved magic. Back then in New York City, I had a friend of mine. He was also a mentor and a teacher of mine, Jeff McBride. And he did a mime act, a magic mime act. And it was unbelievable. And I loved his look and everything. And I thought to myself, I said, wow. I said, if I can take that character and you use it as, as a persona, but with my build, I take it totally, to a different dimension. And so one day I decided, all right, I'm going to paint my face and put this outfit on and, take some pictures and see what happens. Anyway, I did that. And I sent my pictures to I can't remember. It was the talent relations in WWF. I sent it to an address about about a week later, I believe it or not, I get a call from Sergeant Slaughter saying that they were interested, in talking to me and stuff. And mind you, I didn't know how to wrestle, man. I didn't know how to do it. Nothing. You know what I mean? I hadn't had any training or anything. And so I looked up Johnny Rod's wrestling school in Brooklyn, New York. And so I enrolled in that. It was a couple grand, but I said, all right, let me try this thing out and see what happens. And that's how it all started going. That's how I got into the.
It's incredible. It
Yeah.
really is. And so from there, you're learning this different kind of physicality, talking about growing up playing sports.
Yeah.
Now you're learning how to, roll, and learning how to bump,
Oh, yeah.
and it's a different kind of physicality that you're not as
One
used
hundred
to.
percent. 100%. 100%. My first day, my girlfriend at the time was 100% behind me. Her name was Paulette. And she said, you can do this, and with your idea that you have, with your character. At that time, it was at that time it was all characters. It was Mr. Perfect, the Powers of Pain, Ultimate Warrior. There was all these comic book looking characters, and
Larger
that's
than life.
right. And I remember reading a book in the first pages. The kid went to a wrestling show, and that's exactly how he described it. He said he was sitting in the first row, and these larger than life characters were coming. These people that they were just bigger than normal people were coming in, and they were titans in the ring, and all that thought of that excited me. When I read that, and that's kind of the way I looked at it. That's the kind of the way I was looking at it. And when my first day of Johnny Rod school in the ring, of learning how to roll, and then boom, taking a bump. It felt like my body was being broken to pieces. You know what I mean? Now I'm thinking, oh my God, I've worked this hard to work to make my body look like art, and now I'm tearing it up. So it was a mental thing at the same time, to get that thing working. Um, but when I set my mind on something, I'm going to see it through no matter what.
Exactly. You got to put a lot of effort, 110% effort in
Right. So
to
now my
anything.
plate was full. So now my plate was full because in order to keep my size, I got to eat between 6 and 8 meals a day. And then I got to train 3 hours a day. And then I got to go to the ring and roll around and bump for another 2.5, 3 hours. So it wasn't easy. It was a thing where, okay, you want to do this, you got to, like Johnny Rods told me and the rest of the guys, you got to pay your dues.
Yeah, and you really have to sacrifice so much to
Yes.
be able to reach the level of the top. So you have to really stay in shape, work out, uh, do the drills, put in so much reps as possible.
Yes. Yeah, that was that you're right. 100%. And you had to do it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, and so when you're talking to Johnny and he's telling you these pieces of advice, walk me through your first few matches and how did they go? Did you feel confident? Did you feel scared? Did you feel like, okay, let's just get through these and then we'll go on?
Well, it's funny you say that. So let me start by saying I got all the respect in the world for Johnny Rods. He paid his dues. He was in the original WWF with Vince McMahon's father, dad. And this is not. I'm not taking a swing and hit at him here at all. But the actual one that was responsible for anything that I did in the beginning in professional wrestling was Vito LaGrasso. He did the big Vito gimmick, Skull Von Crush. Um, he was with WWE for a while, WCW. He did ECW. He was working already. By the time I started in Johnny Rod's, he was a professional wrestler already. So what happened? I was training one of Vince McMahon's lawyers' best friends, and this is an incredible story. And I didn't tell people for years. I did say it on another couple of podcasts because hey, it's 20 years, 20 something years later, and what are they going to do now? But here's what happened. So I sent my stuff out there. Sergeant Slaughter called me, and I remember he said that they wanted me to come down to the Raw taping, and they were going to have Doink the Clown do something to me. Like throw. They were trying to get some heat on Doink, and he was going to hit me with a pie or whatever. Anyway, I called Vito, and he said, "Man, don't do that. They're going to kill you. They're going to kill you. They're going to kill your gimmick already." And I said, okay. So I called Sergeant Slaughter, and I don't know something. We got out of it somehow. Anyway, believe it or not, about 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail, which said, thank you for contacting us, but we're sorry. Right now, we cannot accept any type of application. You need to have 5 years working experience. In other words, the letter said, "But we don't even know who you are." And I'm sure they were hiring at that time. WWF was hiring guys from Memphis, Texas, Louisiana, people with a name, because there were so many other territories back then. And so that's what Vince was doing, hiring, their stars and just bringing them over to WWF. And so, I was like, all right, cool. I don't have any experience. Anyway, I was training Charles Koppelman at the time in New York. He was the owner of EMI Records Publishing. And he was one of the guys that founded people like Tracy Chapman, Vanilla Ice, Wilson Phillips, and I can keep going down the line. But I was training him, and he asked me one day in the middle of our session, he goes, "Hey, man, how's the wrestling thing going?" I said, right now, I got to get some experience because, I sent my stuff to WWF, but they said I needed. He goes, "Well, I'm best friends with one of Vince's lawyers." He mentioned his name. I can't remember what it was. I mean, it's 20 something years ago, but he says, "Do you want me to say anything? Do you want me to say something to him?" And I thought, sure. I said, "Yeah, sure. Why don't you, say?" Apparently that worked because about and now I was training. This was a couple of months later. I was training at Johnny Rod's regularly, 3 days a week. And I got a call, and it wasn't from Sergeant Slaughter. It might have been Linda McMahon. If I remember correctly, it was Linda McMahon. She had left me a message and said somebody would be in contact with me. Well, about a week later, J.J. Dillon calls me, and J.J. Super nice guy, and he said, "Yeah, we're interested in taking a look at you, and you come." What did he say? Something like, you keep good company, which meant, Charles Koppelman and the lawyer and all that. So, the way I got in was, I would have to say politically, you know what I mean? It was like somebody said, "Come on, do me a favor," and so the favor, was done for me to come in. But anyway, I got a call. This is be at the Manhattan Center on 34th Street and 8th Avenue this Monday. Be there at about 5 o'clock. They were having Monday Night Raw there at the time, every Monday. And I said, okay. By that time I had worked out, my face paint, which I had taken the character from Jeff. I ran into Jeff about a month before that. I'll never forget it, on 55th Street and 8th Avenue. And he was walking and I was walking, and we both saw each other at the same time. And I hadn't seen him in a while. And he says, "Holy cow, man, you're huge." And I had, I was muscular. I was gained a lot of weight, and so I told Jeff. I said, "Hey," I said, "Man, I'm about to sign with WWF, and I'm doing a magic character, and I kind of use your persona and this and that." And he told me, "No, that's fine." He says, "You're going to a totally different industry." So, there was he wasn't going to feel disrespected, because I wasn't going to magic. I was going into wrestling. Now, had I done that and tried to do a magic act, now that's a direct, slap to him. Who knows? He might have tried to sue me, or, but that would have been all he can do. But, it wasn't the point. I wasn't going to disrespect him. He was my friend and my mentor. And I got his blessing anyway. So I went and I went to Manhattan Center. I met all the guys, Steve Lombardi, awesome guy, Bruno Lauer. I'll never forget Mr. Perfect. Came up to me and introduced himself to me, and I thought that was real cool. You know what I mean? And I wasn't starstruck or anything because I had already been competing as a bodybuilder, and had met some pretty big time bodybuilders at the time, and I had done magic, so I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid of being in front of people. I had no butterflies or anything like that. They came. One of the agents came and said, "All right, you're going to be working uh, Iron Mike Sharp, and he's going to run you through a match, and we just want to take a good look at you and stuff." Mind you, I was green as all get out, but I had a really fantastic body. I had a good character gimmick. I did magic and fire on the way to the ring, and so um, I can't say we had a great match because I wasn't good at all. I didn't think I was anyway. I just looked good, but I remember getting back, and one of the agents says, "Don't leave. Vince wants to speak to you." And I said, "Okay, good." So in my mind, I thought, all right, well, if he wants to speak to me, that means he thought something of it, But in essence, when he spoke to me, he said, "I'm going to have JJ in contact with you, and we're going to work something out. We're going to put you on the contract." And I was very, very happy about that. So in essence, when I finally spoke to JJ Dillon, he said, "Look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put you in the contract and send you to Memphis, Tennessee." So what I meant by in essence was I was the first developmental deal, as far as I was the first developmental when there wasn't a developmental. You know what I mean?
This was
You know,
before NXT and the Performance Center. This was
oh
before
yeah, that wasn't
OVW,
yeah,
FCW, all that stuff. This was
yes, that wasn't that was none of that was even a thought. They would just put me on the contract, and they were going to send me to Memphis, Tennessee, because Memphis at the time, at that territory, Jerry Lawler was working with them, and they were going to tell him to, they wanted me to work. They wanted me to work every day and learn the business and learn how to work. I guess to just bring me back at some point in time, and that's exactly what happened. I didn't hesitate. When I remember when Jerry Jarrett called me, he says, "Can you be in Memphis on Friday?" And I said, "Well, sure." We got the tickets, and next thing you know, I was on Saturday morning, USWA Channel 5, with Dave Brown and Lance Russell and all those guys, and that's how it took off. But my first professional wrestling match was a tryout with WWF.
And the cool thing about Memphis is you get that experience, in front of people. And at that time, studio wrestling was a perfect avenue for new guys to get their start. And so you being in front of the camera, getting in front of the crowd, uh, talk to me about the feeling of being in front of, such an audience that I think that it was a great beginning.
Well, yeah, it was different, man. I'm just gonna tell you, it was way different because when I did the Manhattan Center, I mean, we were up north. and it was a, Manhattan Center was a pretty big place. It was a totally different thing, man. I mean, the people up north know it's a show and they get with it real good, and it's entertainment. Entertainment. The people down south, they took it seriously, man, and they were like, they were
Some differences.
major differences. You know what I mean? They were, um, the TV studio was, it was smaller and stuff. So it took a little getting used to be honest with you. I'm thinking, all right, I'll be here a few months and then I'll be back, back up to New York, and it wasn't, that wasn't what was going to happen at all. You know what I mean? It was, the good thing was USWA, the Memphis territory worked Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, twice. Sunday,
Wow.
Sunday you were off, but Monday you'd be right back at it, and sometimes on Saturdays you had TV in the morning, then you had an afternoon show, and then an evening show. So WWF at the time knew what they were doing. They said, man, if we can get this guy to go work and learn to work, you know what I mean? He would learn, which is what I did. And, back then I was in the dressing room with guys like Jeff Jarrett and Brian Christopher, Brian Lawler, Jerry Lawler, Bill Dundee, you named it, Doug Gilbert, Tommy Rich, Eddie Gilbert, his brother. I mean, if you didn't learn to work, there was something wrong with you.
You're around in some really good company, being able to learn from some of the best of the best.
Exactly.
And so anything from those guys, that pieces of advice you picked up and learned from, that you still have applied to today after wrestling?
Well, it was all about attitude as well. You know what I mean? And keeping your head together, and it wasn't. At times it wasn't easy. You know what I mean? At all. Man, sometimes you'd have to drive 6 hours, 7 hours, and then work, and then turn around and come back or go to the next town and stuff. So it taught me a lot of grit. It taught me to always have a good attitude. You know what I mean? Which I always did. I never had any type of problem with anybody. Uh, I was taught to respect ever since I was a kid. So I respected everybody and expected the same back, of course. But I have a lot of good memories with a lot of good guys. And guys. So some of them aren't with us anymore, but I was glad. Put it this way, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything the way it went down. There was a point there where I was going back and forth. They would send for me up to WWE, and I'd do a few house shows, and then they would send me back, and I would go back to this territory. Then they send for me again, or we would do a dark match on the TV, and that was going on for a while. I was going back and forth, back and forth. But all of a sudden, I started liking coming back to the Memphis territory, to the Memphis, Mississippi, Arkansas. It started becoming more like home to me. Going to New York because of the time, Vince had gotten in trouble, and things were shaky at the time. It started being stressful being up there. It was a stressful, people didn't feel good in the dressing room. I'll never forget coming to one of the TV tapings in WWF, and everybody's kind of solemn, and I remember Brian Clark, Adam Baum telling, I said, man, what's going on? He said, man, such and such got fired. And I said, oh, really? He goes, yeah, they're saying that two or three more getting fired. I was like, oh, And it was stuff like that, man. People, it was a nerve-wracking time, so whenever I went back to Memphis, you had guys like PG-13, Jamie Dundee, and Wolfie D, and these other guys just joking around in the dressing room. It started to become home to me.
It's always good to have camaraderie and be a part of an environment that's positive and a family atmosphere. So
Yeah, yeah. And
it
now,
seems like that's what Memphis was for you.
right now, the house shows when I did, WWE, WWF house shows, they were easy as well because they know they were going from one town to another. I remember, I'll never forget. I had to work. We were working. I was working Mark Henry for a stint for about 8, 9 shows in a row. But we did Chattanooga, we did Memphis, we did Little Rock, then we did St. Louis, St. Louis, Kansas City. So it was about 7, and that those were fun. You know what I mean? It was the TVs that was stressful. Now I don't know how they are now. I'm sure later on everything got more relaxed. I hope for them, but just and this is just me. Uh, Even then when it was still comfortable, I was glad to be coming back. You know what I mean, to the territory. And it was just much much more calm and much easier.
When you're in the ring, getting to work so many of these guys, who were some of your favorite opponents that you've gotten to step in the ring with over the years?
And are you talking about in the Memphis territory?
Yeah, when you're in Memphis, getting to work Jerry Lawler or Brian Christopher
Okay.
and some of the other guys that were in there, like Bill Dundee, who were some of the guys that you enjoyed working with in Memphis? And as well, you can talk about some of the people that you enjoyed working with during your time in the WWE as well.
Yeah, I had a ball working with Mark Henry. You know what I mean? He's a great guy, good guy, and he was telling me, let's just do whatever you want to do. I said, well, you're going over, so whatever you want to do is fine with me. And I enjoy that. You know what I mean? I don't, guys that want to do this, and that, and want to do this move, that move, this, and that, and they're just like building to nothing because I was learning to tell a story. In the Memphis territory, they taught you how to work, how to have a match, not just do moves. You know what I mean? So, Mark Henry was good. PJ Walker, he was doing the Aldo Montoya gimmick at the time, was great to work with. I worked Chris Candido, God rest his soul, a bunch of times. Jeff Jarrett as well, was great to work. And I worked him in WWE and in the Memphis territory. Um, Eddie Gilbert was unbelievable to work with. His brother Doug was. I mean, when I start mentioning the guys, and this is no disrespect to anybody at all, I respect all professional wrestlers. But to me, these guys were special. You know what I mean? Eddie Gilbert was special. Doug Gilbert was special. Tommy Rich was special. Jerry Lawler, unbelievable special. Brian Christopher was way ahead of his time. Um, and these names that I mentioned, I worked them not once, not twice, not 10 times. I mean, 100 times. Billy Joe Travis was an unbelievable worker. Buddy Landell, the Rock and Roll Express, Dutch Mantel, even though, you know what I mean, Dutch was different, but, heck of a worker as well. God rest his soul, Steve Dahl and his partner Rex King. They were doing a gimmick in WWE as well, like they were like Chippendales dancers or something. But these guys were all, Pat Tanaka. He was back and forth with WWF and the Memphis territory. These are the elite of the elite when it came down to guys. Coco Beware, of course. I mean, so I can go on, man. You know what I mean? Those guys were special to work with, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They knew their craft, they knew their business, they knew, they knew they had an uncanny they had an uncanny sense of what the people wanted, whether they were a baby face or a heel. You know what I mean? Which I would have to say 50% of the time I was a baby face, 50% of the time I was a heel as well. Um, Jerry Lawler used to love big, muscular heels in his territory. So I had a ball doing them. I had a ball doing both.
What made you decide to step away from the business?
I never really stepped away from the business. Man, think about it. I decided to take a break in 2014, 2015 after signing with WWF in 1995 or 94, something like that. So I had been working every day for 20 years. You know what I mean? And thank God I had not in any way injured myself. And I wasn't lazy. I mean, we had I've always had really good matches, no matter what, and I was just I was just blessed. The Lord had me the whole time because I never got hurt. But what had happened was my son was starting to play football. He was getting a little bit older, and I had already missed a lot of his days, with younger football and birthdays here and there. And I said, all right, you know, I have to be there for his teenage years. You know what I mean? Before I know it, this guy's going to be a man, and it's not right. So um, I didn't alienate myself either. I just stopped taking bookings. You know what I mean? And not 100% either. What I did was uh I moved my son. I moved my son and his mom to another town up in Tennessee, Henderson. And I had always been certified as a personal trainer, so I started training people again. And again, the Lord blessed me, and I was doing very, very well, prepping guys and women for bodybuilding shows, for competition, and just to get people in shape. And man, I mean, I was just doing very, very well. And then every few weeks, I would go do a show. Somebody would call me and say, "Hey, we'd love to." And I said, "All right, I mean, I'll go up and do that." You know what I mean? So I never really left. I never really said, "Okay, I'm not wrestling anymore," ever. I didn't focus on it like I did the last 20 years.
Hmm.
Um, I was still doing, like Jerry Lawler's son, Kevin Lawler, would run shows here and there, and he would always call me and want me booked on them, and I would say sure, okay, stuff like that. I was doing a lot of independence here and there. Um, it wasn't till last year, and I've always kept myself in 100%, great shape. Last year, Randy Hales called me and said they had decided to induct me into the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame. And right after that, that's when all the slew of calls started coming in. Will you do this show? Will you do that show? And I thought, okay, you know what? I took a break. Here I am, and uh, you know, I was still a little, I started getting a little hesitant till I did a show. It was one of the first shows back, and I had some other tights made and stuff. And I remember Jerry Lawler was on the show, Doug Gilbert, and I remember I got dressed, put my face paint on, and all that stuff, and I walked into a room, and the room got silent. I mean, it was people were talking and it was loud, but I walked in and everybody, all of a sudden you can hear a pin drop, and I walked by and I remember Jerry Lawler King coming by. He goes, "Well, you still look the same." And I said, "Oh," I said, "Well, thanks, King." Another gentleman walked out. He was an older fella, and he came out. He said, "Holy cow, Dale!" And I said, "Yeah, what's up?" He says, "You look like you walked out of TV 20 years ago." And so that said, okay, that gave me that. All right, you know what I mean. I didn't want to look any different or any worse uh, that I did when I took the break. So that solidified. Not to mention, about 2 weeks later, Rush Toys got in touch with me and said they were interested in making an action figure of me, the character, and so things started just buzzing, Comic Cons and WrestleCons. You know what I mean? So I'm really excited now, and I want to push the character, Spellbinder character, as far as it can go right now. You know, people are calling me a superhero now. So I mean, I'm just having fun, to be
Yeah,
honest.
that's incredible though, to have such a following, and that the fact that there's life to this persona,
Yes,
and the whole idea of having such an iconic character that people can relate to and get behind all these years later. It has to feel good.
yeah, and then you know what, it kind of and Kevin Lawler, who's I mean, he grew up in the business. He kind of said something, and I thought, you know what, that makes sense. I always resented the fact, in a way, that the Fantasio character, which they called me that because Vince wanted to own the rights to everything. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Which he could not, because the Spellbinder was trademarked and copyrighted by me, and the Spellbinder character, his face paint, everything was my property. So and I told him, I said, well, you guys can use the name. I'm fine with it. I'm working for your company. They didn't want to do that. So, they did televise one. So, quote unquote, supposedly I had a one match and it was over with. You know what I mean? Well, that's the furthest from the truth. You know what I mean? Because maybe under that name, but I've had thousands and thousands and thousands of matches, under that character, which is supposed to be Spellbinder. You know, so to me, this is just the proof in the pudding that Spellbinder can come back. But Kevin Lawler did make a really, really good point, that he said, well, Fantasio might have made one appearance, supposedly, which is not true. I did a bunch of shows for WWE, but he said just from that one televised thing, it became a cult classic where people still watch it, people still talking about me. You know what I mean? And then one thing I learned from Charles Koppelman, the record producer and owner of EMI Records, said whether it's good or bad, publicity is publicity, regardless. You know what I mean? So whatever. You know what I mean? That
You
I'm
got,
signing. I'm
yeah.
signing hundreds of WWE encyclopedias. So
Yeah, I mean, that's a legacy that's going to continue on forever. So being able to be featured in those kinds of mediums and products, I mean, there's something to be said about that for sure.
right,
I want to switch gears and talk about some of the stuff you've done outside of wrestling. I know you've done a lot of charity work and have
yes,
been
sir.
part of different projects. What kinds of things have you done to help out in your community over the years?
Well, man, a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of people do. I'm a minister of the church. So I also go to churches and preach the word and speak to youth councils and stuff. Me and my wife both are big, huge advocates for dogs, for rescues and stuff. Um, you know, and of course, I did a lot of because I'm here in Memphis. I did a lot of work with St. Jude's and the kids. You know what I mean? As of course myself, my character, uh, and I got close to a lot of families. My wife and I got close to a lot of families, and it was a really difficult thing to do, but because some of these kids are really really sick.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And I mean, there was some tough times for me, man, because we lost some of the kids, and just you know just to be 100% transparent with you, it was heartbreaking.
I'm sure it's devastating when you see somebody, especially a kid that young,
Oh my
that's going
God.
through something and you're
And a lot
there.
of the times I would take them out to eat, or they would meet me at church. We would go to church service, and my wife and I would take them out to lunch. You know what I mean? And just make their life different that one day. Where they don't have to be in four walls and a roof in a hospital, which is horrible. You know, um, so that was my way of getting them out and talking to them and giving them hope. You know what I mean? And I tell you what, man, it's challenging. It's very very challenging. You know what I mean? Because there's really nothing you can do. They're terminally ill. You know what I mean? And you want to pray to God and you want to say, "Come on, God, do something for them." You know what I mean? Help them. But he has his own plan. So you have to accept fate the way it happens.
Was there a particular moment or memory where you're talking to these kids that was just so moving for you, that was very emotional? Is there anything that you can think of?
Oh man, listen. As I said, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, rough project area. Back in the day, there was 13 of us. There was 13. We weren't a gang, but we were a group, and there was 13 of us. And I can just tell you that there's only three alive, and one of us is me, of course. The other one is Javier, and he's spending the rest of his life in prison for murder. And then we got another one, another guy, Nelson, and he's still alive, but he's in a wheelchair because he had a bullet shot into his spine, which made him a paraplegic. And the 10 other ones are dead. So I've seen and I've dealt with, you know, but there was this one uh young man, Diego, who I got really close to. And he came to see me a number of times at church. And his mom and his dad um, were with him the whole time. And they come to church. And one day, we knew he was getting worse. But one day, I hadn't seen him in about 2 weeks. My wife and I were so busy working and doing all kinds of stuff, but I hadn't seen him. And so one Sunday, I told my wife, Marsha, I said, "Hey, you know what? I think we need to go see Diego." You know what I mean? And she said, "Okay." She goes, "I'll tell you what. Why don't we try to call his parents, and we'll just go down there and take him some food or whatever." And I said, "Okay." I'll never forget it. It was a cold November, and St. Jude's is downtown Memphis, and downtown Memphis is the zoo as well. So we called them. We didn't get an answer. So I said, "Well, tell you what, why don't we go downtown and get something to eat and maybe just walk around in the zoo. Even though it's a little cold, we can go in and out of places." And she said, "Okay, yeah, that sounds good." And my wife is so supportive about that. You know what I mean? I love her to death because of that. But we went down and we went to the zoo, and it was cold, man. I remember. So we spent as much time as we possibly could. And on Sundays, Saturday or Sundays, I can get a cheat meal. I'm very strict with my diet, but on Saturday and Sunday, I can have whatever I want. Anyway, we were downtown, and there was a place where they make grass-fed burgers and stuff like that. So she said, "You want to go there?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go there." I'll never forget it. Marshall was sitting across from me, and I had the burger in my hand. And I remember I took a bite, and I'm chewing it, and I got a text. I grabbed the phone out of my pocket, and I'm still chewing. And as I'm looking at this text, it was Diego's father. It was his dad. And he said to me in the text, "Hey, thanks for getting in contact with us. And thank you for all you and your wife has done for us. And just to let you know, Diego's in heaven with our father." And I almost choked on the burger. It was, I just looked at Marcia. Just all I can do was stare at her for a second. Where she was like, "Everything okay? You okay?" And then I just gave her the phone. She was like, "Oh my God." You know what I mean? It just felt, it was an empty, horrible feeling, you know. And I
Yeah.
tell you what, man, that thing that hurt so bad. I told Marsha, I said, "Man, we were heading home," and I said, "I don't know if I can do this anymore." I said, I don't know if I can do it anymore. Of course, whenever I'm asked, "Can you come see this young man? He's hurting you or whatever." Of course, you know what I mean. Do I volunteer to do it? I'm not going to lie. I'm a very, very honest, straight up man. I don't. No, I don't. I try not to volunteer. You know what I mean. If my mom asks me, you know what I mean, my sister, anybody, my wife or whatever, I'll do it. But as far as me trying to, to put myself out there, that thing hurt too bad. You know what I mean? Even telling you now just brought up some, really, really, sorry feelings in me about that.
Ah, man, it's never good to lose a good friend or someone who you've been working with for a while. And Diego's loss, I'm sure, meant a lot to you. And, those moments that you
You know,
had spent.
yes. And the other thing was, and who knows, maybe this is just a selfish part of me, but I wanted him to be okay. I wanted him to be good. I wanted him to know that what I was telling him, you know, was right. Oh yeah, it worked. What you said to me, it worked. You know what I mean? That's one of the other things. You know, I don't ever want to tell a young man. Diego was about 13 years old. I never want to tell a young man or a young boy, young girl, anything that they're going to be okay. You know what I mean? And know that that it's almost not true. You know what I mean? But I really felt in my heart that Diego was going to be okay. I believed it. I really believed that. No, he's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. And maybe that's what it was. That I wanted it to work. I wanted it to work. I wanted it I wanted it to be the way I said it was going to be, and it wasn't. So it was a disappointment to me as well. It was pretty hard. The other time was when my best friend in the whole world, Brian Christopher, passed away. Um, that was very, very heart wrenching,
Mm-hmm.
to watch him, he was in a machine. And in my heart, I knew the machine was breathing for him. I knew Brian, I said, he's gone. Um, it was me. I'll never forget it. It was me, Jerry Lawler, his girlfriend, Brian's mother, and Brian's brother. And I think referee Jerry Calhoun was there with his wife as well. And the doctor came in and came. Jerry didn't want to cut the machine off. He was like, no, no, we should wait. We should wait a few days and see what happens. See if I, King wanted to believe that Brian was going to wake up out of that. And in my heart, I knew he wasn't. I knew. So the main head doctor came in and started checking the machine. Now this doctor he was Hispanic. He was Hispanic. So in Spanish, um, I asked him in Spanish. I said, "Hey," I said, "Let me ask you a question." I said, "Before I ask you," I said, "that man that's laying in there, he's my brother. Now we don't have the same mother or the same father, but he's my brother. You know what I mean? That guy's my brother. But I need to ask you, and I'm asking you in Spanish because nobody else understands us. And I need you to be 100% honest, man to man." I said that at this time, the only reason his heart's beating is because that machine is breathing for him. Am I right? And he looked at me and he looked back to the machine. I says, I am not going to tell anybody anything. And that's why I'm asking you in Spanish. I said, am I right? And he looked at me and he said, in Spanish, he said, yes. And I said, so in other words, we are in agreement that if we turn that machine off, he's done. And he said, oh yeah, he's done. And I said, how long? He goes, it can be 5 minutes, it can be 5 hours. You know what I mean? He goes, there's no telling. And I said, all right. I said, now listen. I said, thank you. I said, thank you for being a man and telling me the truth. And he said, he looked at me and like closed his eyes and nodded and said, I hate to be, the one to tell, and I said, no, no, no. I asked you. I knew already. I give you my word, man, that when I got done talking to this doctor, the doctor walked out and I looked over at Jerry Lawler and we locked eyes. I mean, like we locked eyes and he looked at me and he says, Dale. And I said, yes, sir. He says, what did he say to you? And I said, King, Brian's gonna go. If we turn that machine off, Brian's gone. And that was probably the hardest thing I had to do is
Wow.
tell a son's father that son wasn't coming back.
And that death was hard
Oh,
to hear, from so many people. It's never good to lose anyone, and
no,
and
not a son.
especially someone that is that close. You're that close to the family, and Brian Christopher meant a lot to the wrestling community,
Without a doubt.
uh, and he's still missed to this day.
Yes, sir.
Um,
Absolutely.
Now, talk to me about what does giving back to your community mean to you? Why do you feel passionate about giving back?
Oh man. Quite honestly, I'm just paying it forward. Man, I'm God's blessed me, man. you know, the story that I told you, which was 100% truth, is it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. A guy coming out of Brooklyn, New York, doesn't doesn't get first professional wrestling match as a tryout in WWF. It just that doesn't happen. You know what I mean? You know, during the whole time, I watched people come and go. I watched heartbreaks. You know what I mean? I watch people say, I watch men and women say, "Oh my God, my life is ruined." You know what I mean? They said this to me. He said, "Man, I can't believe it. I was here, I did this and I did that. I left my job and blah blah blah, and they're gone." You know what I mean? They either got released or, and I was blessed the whole time. I was getting paid by WWF slash WWE and USWA at the same time. I was getting two checks. You know what I mean? And God bless them both. Steve Lombardi and Bruno Lauer taught me, keep your mouth shut and don't say nothing to anybody about anything. You know what I mean? So I was getting a check for them for almost 20 years.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, do I have anything bad to say about either company? No, ever. I mean, I wish I was a more successful in WWE, yeah, sure. I mean, but I'm happy with what I've done. I mean, some people, and I don't know, I mean, maybe because of the money, but some people say it's more of a privilege or an honor to be inducted into the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame than the WWE Hall of Fame. Who knows? I don't know. Some people may go, no, it's better. I know that I was in the dressing room in both WWE and USWA with legends that are just not going to be replaced ever. And that cemented legacies for the rest of their lives. So I've been very blessed, man. So for me to pay it forward, it didn't matter. I never, I was never secretive about anything I did. I mean, whenever, I had a young guy come up to me and ask me, hey, Spell, what do you think? Why should I have done it this way? This and I said, no, you got to do it the way it's going to work out for you. I never tried to hush or push anybody away. You know what I mean? Because even as a magician, you know what I mean? Jeff McBride, he gave me a blessing and he said, hey, yeah, you go ahead and use the character. I'm fine. You know what I mean? Jeff McBride's a master magician. He's a one of the greatest and the legendary magicians of our time. You know what I mean? I got total nothing but respect, nothing but nothing good to say about him. As a performer and as a man. You know what I mean? He's fantastic, and he gave me a blessing. So why wouldn't I pay it forward?
That's all we can do is try to help someone out, help someone else, make them feel good, and the cycle just keeps on going. Do good for others.
Exactly. You know what I mean? So, and I stay in touch with guys like Doug Gilbert and Reggie B. Fine and Tommy Rich, and every once in a while I'll talk to Jamie Dundee, and I got a bunch of toy and comic cons coming up, so it's gonna, I'm just enjoying it, having fun, you know what I mean, and uh, no matter what, I'm still in church every Wednesday and every Sunday, so and that's what I do.
Gotta stay busy and gotta keep everything going. The faith and everything. So,
Exactly, you got that.
all right. Well, this has been wonderful getting the chance to speak with you. I want to say thank you for coming on to Wrestling with Heart. It means a lot to me and to my listeners and viewers that are watching this on YouTube. I know we've been talking about doing this for a long time. So glad we've
Yes.
made it work.
Yeah.
Uh, where can people find out more about you on social media? You've been plugging the action figures. Where can
Yeah,
people?
man. Just stay on. The action figure, you can take a look at it. They got a couple of versions, a couple of variants coming out. They got actually one of the action figures actually has what I'm pretty famous for is pulling the underwear out of the opponents. So one of the variants has the underwear. The other one now they came out with a mini master Spellbinder action figure. So there's a bunch of them, but you can go to rushfigures.com and you can get a hold of me on Facebook under Del Rios, or you want to email me. I'm getting a lot of emails for appearances at delrios43@gmail.com. And so I welcome everybody to, give me a hit. And again, we got a lot of guys trying to get me on shows and stuff. And so feel free to contact me, and if we can make something work, we'll do it.
All right. Thanks again, and you're more than welcome to come back.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Take care.
Okay, bud.
This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.